This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Today I'm going to tell you my favourite song from every year from 1964 to the present day. So let's dive straight in the 1960s, and I think it will come as no surprise to any regular watchers of my channel that we're going to see some Beatles here. In 1964, my favourite song of the year, released in that year, is And I Love Her by the Beatles.
And I love her.
Okay, next, 1965, and we once again, no surprises, have the Beatles, but this is where the Beatles are starting to get more interesting. We have Norwegian Wood.
I once had a girl, or should I say, she once had me.
This song is from Rubber Soul, and Rubber Soul was the album that happened just as the Beatles were deciding not to tour anymore. So we can hear the Beatles starting to make decisions in their music making where they're not concerned about, oh, how will we do this live? For example, including a sitar on this recording, making it the first ever Western pop song to include a sitar. And moving on to 1966, we can see very much again the Beatles' studio wizardry coming in. This is Tomorrow Never Knows.
It is not dying. It is not dying.
Tomorrow Never Knows is from Revolver, the follow-up to Rubber Soul, where the Beatles really doubled down on using the studio as an instrument within itself, and we can really hear that here in Tomorrow Never Knows with all the effects, the drone from the tambura. It's really such a atmospheric piece of music that had never been created before. Nothing before this song really sounded like this song. And that takes us to 1967, where yet again we have a Beatles song. Don't worry, this video isn't all about the Beatles, but here in 67 we have what is probably the peak of the Beatles using the recording studio as an instrument within itself, and that is Strawberry Fields Forever.
I'm going to Strawberry Fields.
Strawberry Fields Forever isn't only my favourite song from 1967, it's basically my favourite song of all time. I just can't get over the unique sound world of this recording. Now we move on to 1968, and yes, there's loads of Beatles songs I could include in this year, like Dear Prudence or Blackbird, but there's actually a song that I like even more than those songs that came out this year, and that is Glenn Campbell's Wichita Lineman.
And I need you more than won't you.
Wichita Lineman, written by legendary songwriter Jimmy Webb, is a beautiful song depicting the sense of loneliness and distance, remoteness, and it has some beautifully romantic lyrics in it, like, I need you more than want you, and I want you for all time. I can't listen to the song without feeling emotional. Okay, 1969, and although on this year I did consider Space Oddity by David Bowie or Good Times, Bad Times by Led Zeppelin, I once again went with a Beatles song. I went with Hey Bulldog.
If you're lonely, you can talk to me.
Hey Bulldog is a lesser known Beatles song. It's a bit of a hidden gem because it was included on an album that wasn't really an album. It was the Yellow Submarine album, half of which was just the soundtrack that George Martin had composed for the film, and the other half was largely just songs that had been released in previous records. But there was a handful of new songs on this album, and one of them was Hey Bulldog, and I absolutely love this song. So that's the 60s done. Let's move on to 1970, and once again there is a Beatles album here that we could talk about, the last Beatles album, Let It Be, which certainly had some songs in it which could have been my favourite pick for 1970. But there's actually another album that came out in 1970 that I absolutely adore, Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel, and that album's full of amazing tracks, but I think my favourite track on that album is Paul Simon is one of my favourite songwriters of all time, and he has a real range in his style, and I really just love the sound and mood of this song. It's got a really positive energy to it, and I just love the instrumentation of this one. Now 1971 is a year where there was way too much good stuff to choose from. I really wanted to put Tiny Dancer here by Elton John. There's also Joni Mitchell's Blue album. There's David Bowie's Hunky Dory album. But the song I actually put here in 1971 as my favourite song is Riders on the Storm by The Doors.
Riders on the storm. Riders on the storm.
This song is the epitome of atmosphere. And not to mention that the Rhodes piano solo on this track is actually one of sort of the big inspirations that made me want to learn how to play the keyboards. 1972, and my favourite song that came out this year, was written by Jackson Browne but made most famous by Eagles. It's Take It Easy.
Take it easy, take it easy.
Take It Easy is such a perfect feel-good song. It's exactly the sort of song you want on when the sun is shining and you're driving around or you're walking around. And it's just also quite a comforting song when you're feeling a bit down. It's very uplifting. 1973, I really considered going with Aladdin Sane by David Bowie from the album of the same name, because that song has some amazing piano work on it that really inspired me when I was learning how to play piano. But that same year, 73, came out an album which is really one of my favourites of all time, an album from which many of the songs could have been my favourite, and that's Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. As I said, there's loads of songs in this album that could be my favourite, but I tend to go towards Any Colour You Like, which is a bit of an odd pick, I guess, because it's an instrumental, but I just can't get over the keyboard sound, the synth sound on this track. 1974, and my pick for this year is Ricky Don't Lose That Number by Steely Dan.
Ricky, don't lose that number. You don't wanna call nobody else.
Steely Dan are one of those acts which is really hit and miss for me. Their music is always interesting in the way that they've blended elements from jazz and rock together, but it only works for me, half the time. They definitely have some really fantastic music, some of my favourite songs ever, but they also have a whole bunch of music which I don't really care for. But Ricky Don't Lose That Number is a real favourite of mine. Okay, moving on to 1975. And this year, I really wanted to include the song I'm Not in Love by 10cc. I think 10cc are really underrated, and they've got loads of really interesting creative music, and I'm Not in Love is probably the pinnacle of their work. But unfortunately, this song happened to come out the same year as another song which is also a pinnacle of creativity and also one of my absolute favourites of all time, Bohemian Rhapsody, Queen.
Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?
Bohemian Rhapsody came from the album A Night in the Opera, which is one of my favourite albums of all time. Features loads of incredibly creative music. Queen made loads of great music, but I think A Night in the Opera is probably the crowning achievement of their back catalogue. 1976, and we're back with Eagles again, and this time it's everyone's favourite, Hotel California.
Hotel California.
This song has a deceptively simple structure to it. It's more or less just what we could call a binary form of verse, chorus, verse, chorus. But at the end of the song, over that repeating verse chord progression, we get that beautiful guitar solo with those harmonized lines. And this song is also a king of atmosphere. You really do feel like you're driving through the desert in California when you're listening to this song. Moving on to 1977, there's quite a few songs I considered for this year. I considered Easy by the Commodores. I considered anything from Billy Joel's The Stranger album, particularly She's Always a Woman. I also considered I Feel Love by Donna Summer. But the song I went with was Mr. Blue Sky by ELO.
Mr. Blue Sky, please tell us why you had to hide away for so long.
Many people, most prominently John Lennon, have said that ELO, Electric Light Orchestra, basically picked up where the Beatles left off, took that ambitious approach to studio music and ran with it. Okay, 1978, and we have a song which is one of the best guitar songs ever written, Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits.
We're the Sultans of Swing.
This song is just an absolute tune, but what's great about this song, what's very sort of meta and relatable, is that it's about a small-time band playing in a pub. And that is something that most musicians can relate to, but it doesn't sort of look down on that experience. It almost sort of appreciates that a band playing in a pub, not necessarily to a massive audience, are still a great band, still making great music that affects people. And what's really cool is when this song, Sultans of Swing, is played in a pub. You see it in a pub, and it's almost like a song written about what you're experiencing in that moment. So it's a very self-referential sort of piece of music. For 1979, we actually have a song that very much feels like it should be in the next decade, but that's always a good sign of a song being ahead of its time, pioneering. This is Cars by Gary Newman. Gary Newman was such an innovator when it came to electronic music. He basically brought the sort of punk new wave energy but into Moog synthesizers. And this song just has such a unique sound to it, unique feel, and of course is best listened to in a car. And with that, we arrive in what is probably, song for song, my least favourite decade, but there's still many fantastic songs that came out in this decade. It's the 1980s. And we're going to start off in 1980 with an artist I've mentioned a lot so far, but not actually included as my pick. But here he does get the pick. It's Ashes to Ashes by David Bowie.
Ashes to ash and funk to funk it. We know Major Tom.
Everyone knows that Bowie had lots of different eras across his career. And for me, I personally prefer his music from the beginning of the 70s, Hunky Dory, Spiders from Mars, that sort of era. But this song is an exception to that rule. I just love this song. The atmosphere, the theme, and particularly the 3-bar loop we get, not only at the beginning of the song, but nearer the end. I love 3-bar loops. They have such a hypnotizing sound where they sort of draw you in. 1981, I did consider Golden Brown by the Stranglers, but I actually went with Once in a Lifetime by Talking Heads. This track comes from the album Remain in Light, which is a classic album by Talking Heads. But for me, I don't actually particularly care for this album. It doesn't really work for me. I actually bought this album on vinyl because I love Once in a Lifetime so much. But I was disappointed by the rest of the album. I always heard it referred to as a classic, but the sort of loose jam nature of the album doesn't really work for me. But Once in a Lifetime very much does work for me. Moving on to 1982, and my favourite pick for this year is Senses Working Overtime by XTC. Don't get me wrong, I do really like XTC. I love this song, and I love about 5 XTC songs very much. But generally, I'm not a massive fan of them. And this song's presence on this list is less a reflection of how much I love this song and more a reflection of just how little music in 1982 really resonates for me. I think this is the era where, although there is still loads of great music, it just doesn't hit me on that same level as some of the other music on this list. But don't get me wrong, I do really like Senses Working Overtime by XTC. 1983, I did consider the song A New England by Billy Bragg, which was a really influential song on me when I first got into songwriting. But actually, I decided to go with something a bit different, Blue Monday by New Order.
How does it feel to treat me like you do?
This is one of those classic songs where it really breaks the formula of everything that came before it, but it does it so well that it just becomes obscenely popular. I particularly love the long form version of this song because it's one of those songs that I think needs time to unfold and develop with all of its different layers that come in and out. It's, harmonically, melodically, quite a simple song, but it's all about those different sounds and those different textures that develop throughout the song. 1984, and once again, this is one of those years where there wasn't a particular song that really stood out to me this year. But there is a song that came out this year which I would consider one of my favourite Queen songs, and certainly my favourite Queen song from the 1980s. It's Radio Gaga.
All we hear is Radio Gaga, Radio Gaga.
Radio Gaga at the time, I think, was seen as a bit of a weird turn for Queen, which were a very guitar-focused band, here on Radio Gaga really embracing synthesizers. But I think that stigma of synths has now worn off, and we can see that this song has very much stood the test of time, especially when it's got so many other Queen songs to compete against as a classic. I think people still love this song, and for good reason. Moving on to 1985, I did consider Money for Nothing by Dire Straits here. That's another fantastic song from this year. But instead, I decided to go with Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds. This song, which of course was made famous at the end of Breakfast Club, the classic film from 1985. I actually was first introduced to this song by that episode of Futurama where Fry is learning about his brother. Very emotional for a cartoon show. This song is great. It captivates it's really one of those songs that bottles a feeling, and that feeling is obvious, right? That feeling of wanting to remember something, wanting desperately not to lose something. And you can feel that in the music. It just really plays that emotion. 1986, and there was a particular album that came out this year, which is one of my favourites, So by Peter Gabriel. And I very much considered putting Big Time from that album as my pick for 86. But actually, there's another song that came out that year, which is one of my real favourite songs of all time. And that is Don't Dream It's Over by Crowded House.
Hey now, don't dream it's over. Hey now.
Crowded House really embody for me that kind of Beatles inspired sound, and I almost feel like Crowded House here in the 80s was foreshadowing the resurgence of interest in 60s music that would happen in the 90s, with Britpop music. They have a lot of songs, Crowded House, which sound like they could have even been written by someone like John Lennon. I love a lot of Crowded House songs, and this one, Don't Dream It's Over, is one of my real favourites. 1987, I did consider Where the Streets Have No Names by U2 from their classic album Joshua Tree. U2 are one of those bands which I think, like many people, I like, but my like for them doesn't go deep enough to call it love. Where the Streets Have No Names is certainly my favourite U2 song, but the pick I went for this year in 87 was actually Big Love by Fleetwood Mac. Big Love comes from Fleetwood Mac's Tango in the Night album, which is basically the 80s version of Rumours. Rumours is the massive 70s album that Fleetwood Mac did, and just as a signal of what a legendary band Fleetwood Mac are, they managed to have another culture-defining album in the next decade, Tango in the Night, and Big Love is only one of the great songs from that album. 1988, and my pick for this year is Where Is My Mind by the Pixies.
Where is my mind? Where is my mind? Where is my...
Here at the end of the 80s, we can see acts like Pixies driving us into the style of music we'll come to anticipate in the 90s. So much like I talked about earlier, where Gary Newman with Cars, it sounds like it's from the 80s, but it's actually from the 70s. I feel like Where Is My Mind, Pixies, sounds like it's from the 90s, but it's from the 80s, because Pixies were ahead of their time. 1989, and I almost put Fool's Gold by Stone Roses in this slot. And they are once again a band who sound like they're from the 90s, but they actually began before the 90s because they were kind of pioneering that 90s sound. But actually, I didn't go with Fool's Gold in the end because another album came out this year with two songs in it, which I love. But the song I'm going to actually pick is End of the Line by the Travelling Wilburys.
Well, it's all right, even if they say you're wrong. Well,
If you don't know who the Travelling Wilburys are, they are the ultimate dad rock band. They're the ultimate supergroup. Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Jeff Lynne, Tom Petty, Roy Orbison. Could you ask for a more legendary lineup? And this, hearing these guys play together would already be enough of a novelty to make it worth listening to their music. But they actually wrote some really great songs, and End of the Line is one of them. And now we've arrived in the 90s, and for 1990, I'm going with They Might Be Giants and their big hit, Birdhouse in Your Soul.
Make a little birdhouse in your soul.
They Might Be Giants are a really quirky, creative group who have done a whole range of things in their back catalogue. But Birdhouse in Your Soul is probably their most well-known song, their biggest hit. And this song is really quite wild. It's got loads of interesting chord changes. It's got a really creative, interesting lyric. One of the simple things I love about this song so much, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but the opening section, I think intentionally, is mixed quieter than the first chorus. So when the song starts playing, you turn it up because you can't really hear the first section, and then when that first chorus hits, it really hits you in the face. I just think that's a really fun, creative choice, assuming it was an intentional choice, but it really works. But yeah, if you don't know They Might Be Giants, check them out because they've written a whole range of really interesting songs. 1991, I considered various songs. I considered Losing My Religion by R.E.M. I considered various tracks from Nirvana's Nevermind. And I also considered 4 Seasons in One Day by Crowded House, like I mentioned earlier. But I actually didn't go with any of those. I went with Red Hot Chili Peppers' Under the Bridge.
I don't ever wanna feel like I did.
Under the Bridge is a stunning piece of music, beautiful guitar work, really interesting, unique sort of structure and composition of the song, where we have this iconic guitar intro that's actually in a different key and slightly different tempo than the verse. And then we have this outro section, which goes into a whole different vibe when that gospel choir comes in. Really beautiful piece of music. 1992, and my pick for this year is Killing in the Name Of by Rage Against the Machine. Now, this isn't actually my favourite Rage song, and this album in general, I could have chosen a whole bunch of songs from this album, but Killing in the Name Of, at least here in the UK, it has a particular prominence because there was this campaign about 10 years ago to get Killing in the Name Of to #1 for Christmas Day. Basically, in the UK, the Christmas #1, the song that happens to be #1 on Christmas Day, is a bit of a sort of race. Everyone wants that. It's like a special accolade. And for years, whoever won the X Factor, which is basically American Idol, it's, like a singing competition, Simon Cowell, whoever won the X Factor would wind up getting the #1 at Christmas. And there was this campaign on Facebook to stop that from happening and encouraged everyone to buy Rage Against the Machine, Killing in the Name Of, on iTunes. And they won. So it was this really great kind of rebellious move that actually came to fruition and introduced a lot of people my age to Rage Against the Machine, which is a great thing. 1993, the year I was born. A few different songs I considered for this year. I considered For Tomorrow by Blur. I considered All Apologies by Nirvana. But I actually went with a song which not only do I at least not really associate with the 90s, I don't really associate this artist with the 90s, but I also only discovered the song last year. I was introduced to it by a friend of mine. It's Billy Joel, Lullaby.
Good night, my angel, now it's time to sleep.
This song comes from Billy Joel's River of Dreams album, which was his last major album that he recorded after going on an extended hiatus, from a recording point of view at least, which lasted actually up until this year. And this song is utterly beautiful. It's written for his daughter, and it really is a tearjerker, this song. 1994, and we have Say It Ain't So by Weezer. Say It Ain't So from Weezer's Blue album. This album is just great. I absolutely adore this album. Weezer's output after this album I find quite hit and miss. I think you have to kind of cherry pick the great songs. But Weezer have such a great sound. And the thing I love most about Say It Ain't So is it's so emotionally raw. Particularly that bridge, like father, stepfather, the son is drowning in the flood. Oh, that gets me every time. It really gives me goosebumps. 95, and an album came out this year which I absolutely adore, and that's The Bends by Radiohead. But of course I've got to choose just one song, and for me, although it's tough, I think my favourite song from that album is Fake Plastic Trees. Once again, for regular viewers of the channel, just like in the 60s with the Beatles, from this point on, any year where Radiohead released an album, you're going to see Radiohead. I love Radiohead. This year, we have The Bends, which is not always considered one of their greatest albums, but I think it's, for me, it is definitely one of my favourites. It's a different type of Radiohead than what you get later on in their career, but I love all types of Radiohead. 1996, and we have another entry by Rage Against the Machine. It's Balls on Parade. The riff of this song is so sick. I love this song so much. I was ultimately introduced to this song by Guitar Hero. It was such a fun song to play on Guitar Hero. For me, Rage are one of those bands where all of their songs kind of sound a bit similar, but I like how they sound. They have that formula and it works. And this is just one of the greatest versions, one of the greatest incarnations of that Rage formula. Creating great music takes a lot of skill, particularly nowadays where a musician is expected not just to be songwriter and artist, but also producer and distributor. And a really great accessible way to learn loads of creative skills is with Skillshare. Skillshare offers thousands of classes on a whole range of skills, including many different musical skills like sampling. A class that I definitely want to check out is Jacob Collier's exclusive Skillshare class on the fundamentals of music making. Learning a new skill is really an investment in yourself, so why not pick up a new skill or hobby? And it's not just music classes that Skillshare offers. You can develop your skills in animation, creative writing, filmmaking, graphic design, or even develop your skills in marketing or productivity. So if you would like to start developing your skills, the first 500 people to use the link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. 1997, and this is the year that Radiohead released a very significant album, OK Computer. Another album where I could have picked various songs from it that I love, but the song I've gone with is Paranoid Android. As I mentioned before, Radiohead are one of those artists that for me just cut above everything else. There was another album that came out this year that I absolutely adore, Either Or by Elliott Smith. Elliott Smith is a real favourite of mine, but unfortunately he had some steep competition in the form of OK Computer. Moving on to 1998, and my pick for this year is Closing Time by Semisonic. I know this song is a bit of a cliche, it's like a bit overplayed, a bit cheesy, but much like Don't You Forget About Me that we talked about earlier, Simple Minds, Closing Time, Semisonic really bottles a feeling we all relate to, that feeling of something coming to an end that you loved and that bittersweetness of that. And there's some lyrics in the song which have genuinely brought me comfort in times where something in my life is ending. That lyric of every new beginning comes from some other new beginning's end is such an obvious but such a warm and friendly thing to hear when something you love is coming to an end. Okay, we've reached the last year of the 90s, 99, and there was 2 different songs I was thinking about for this year. They both come from the same album, 13 by Blur, which was their album where they got a bit more art rocky and a bit less Brit poppy. I was really close to putting Coffee and TV here, but I went with a different Blur song. I went with Tender.
Come on, come on, come on, get through it.
I've used this word a lot in this video, but Tender is very atmospheric. And I love that thing in music. I love atmosphere in music. Music can transport you to a place. It can almost rewire your senses into feeling a whole different time and space. And that's something that really happens for me with Tender. Not only because it's a beautiful piece of music with such a sort of warm ambience to it, but it also takes me back to a time in my childhood as well, when my mum would play this song a lot. So this has always been and will always be a real favourite of mine. Right, we've now reached the 21st century, and this is another Radiohead year. This is the year that Radiohead released their very divisive album, which has now become a agreed upon classic, but at the time people could not agree on that. This is Kid A, and there's lots of songs on Kid A which I really love. Of all Radiohead albums, I actually think Kid A is the one that you really have to listen to as a unit. But if I have to choose one song, it would be the national anthem. The fuzzy bass line on this song is so simple yet so effective, going between that major third and minor third. The song is basically just vibing on one chord for the whole thing, but it is so exciting despite that. Also, I found out that that bass line, despite being perhaps one of Radiohead's most iconic bass lines, wasn't performed by Colin Greenwood, the band's bassist, was actually performed instead by Tom York. And now 2001, and this is another Radiohead year, we get Amnesiac, which is basically Kid A Part 2. This album even isn't as solid as Kid A, probably because it's kind of the leftover tracks from Kid A, but it has got some classics on it, and I think a song on there which we can all agree is one of Radiohead's most beautiful songs is Pyramid Song. Pyramid Song has such a captivating sound to it, not only through its use of unusual Phrygian harmony, but that rhythm that I made an entire video on. This is the most un-4/4 sounding song to be in 4/4, in my opinion. 2002, there was a lot of music this year that I enjoyed. Chili Peppers, for example, Zephyr Song from the By the Way album. Coldplay released their second album, on which was In My Place, which is probably it's my favourite Coldplay song. But neither of those songs are my pick for this year. My pick for 2002 is No One Knows by Queens of the Stone Age. It's just a classic rock song, right? I feel like Queens of the Stone Age have given us some of the last classic rock songs, at least for now. 2003, and this is another Radiohead year. This year came out Hail to the Thief. This album, I would say, is stronger than Amnesiac, not as strong as Kid A, but it has got some great cuts in it, and my favourite song on this album is Myxomatosis. Myxomatosis not only has a sound to it, which is like no other song I have heard, this sort of incredibly fuzzy, thick synth sound, but it's also got a really intriguing rhythm to it as well. I actually made another video about that song recently, looking at its unusual kind of 3 but it's in 4 rhythm. Check it out if you haven't seen that. 2004, and this year saw an album which I think was formative for a lot of musicians of my age. It was the album American Idiot by Green Day, and although there's lots of songs on that album which I really enjoy, I think my favourite song on that album is their epic Jesus of Suburbia. This song is basically Green Day's Bohemian Rhapsody, multi-movement, long song, takes you on a whole journey. And I've always loved this song, but I love this song even more now that I've seen the American Idiot musical, where they set the songs of American Idiot, the album, to a musical on stage. The first song, American Idiot, yeah, it's cool, but it's when you get to Jesus of Suburbia that you realise how this song is telling a story and can be so kind of cinematic and, well, theatrical. Moving on to 2005, where we have Sufjan Stevens and his song Casimir Pulaski Day.
In the morning, through the window shade, when the light pressed up again.
Casimir Pulaski Day is from Sufjan Stevens' most famous album, Illinois. And this song is one of many great songs on this album. This album is well worth a listen. It's an incredibly diverse album, very creative and varied. But this song is Sufjan Stevens at his most heart-wrenching. This song tells the story of a friend dying from cancer, and it's just so beautiful. And anyone who's experienced someone at the end of their life, this song can really hit hard for you. 2006, and we have Samson by Regina Spektor.
Samson went back to bed, not much hair left on his head.
Regina Spektor has written loads of really interesting songs. She has a real voice as a songwriter. Her style is very recognizable. And although in recent years I haven't really connected with her music, her new music, the music she did in the 2000s is some of my favourite, particularly on the album Begin to Hope, from which Samson is taken. And Samson has this beautiful lyrical concept where it likens the story of Samson and Delilah from the Bible to somebody experiencing chemotherapy. A beautiful metaphor, beautiful connection, beautiful song. 2007, and this is a Radiohead year. In Rainbows, probably my favourite album of all time, came out in 2007. I love every song on this album, but my favourite has to be Nude.
Don't get any big.
2008, and we have Mykonos by Fleet Foxes. Fleet Foxes are a band whose first and second albums are some of my favourites. After that, I found they got a little bit too, I don't know, ambient. The songs were a little bit less structured for me, a little bit too much reverb, I would say. But Mykonos actually doesn't come from any of those albums. It comes from a EP called Sun Giant, but somehow is one of the band's most popular songs. I was introduced to Mykonos by a CD I got with Q magazine. Back when I was a teenager, I would read Q magazine, which was a music magazine, and every now and then they would include a CD of songs, and those were the editions you wanted to get, because those songs, those CDs were brimming with cool songs. And one of the songs I was introduced to through one of those CDs was Mykonos. 2009, we have Ignorance by Paramore. This was the album which first introduced me to Paramore, the Brand New Eyes album, which included Ignorance. And even to this day, Paramore are one of those bands, particularly on this album and the album that came before it, where if I need some high energy music to feel good, particularly maybe if I'm driving home and I want to stay awake, I'll put this on. Hayley Williams is just such a good singer, and some of these songs on these albums, particularly Ignorance, are so good. Really good songs. Okay, we have now entered the next decade, the 2010s, and starting off for the year 2010, we have the song Congratulations by MGMT.
Congratulations.
Oracular, Spectacular, MGMT's first album, was one of my favourites. I loved loads of songs from that. And I would have included it on this list, but that came out in 2007 when Radiohead came out, so I couldn't include it really. But here on their second album, I'm including MGMT. Congratulations, which is the title track from MGMT's second album, is a great song. This second album, for me, was everything I loved about the first album, but MGMT allowed themselves to be a bit more progressive, a bit less poppy. You can hear Pink Floyd influence, you can hear David Bowie influence on this album. There's loads of great songs on this album, but Congratulations is probably my favourite. 2011, and we are back in a Radiohead year. And this is the year that Radiohead released an album which I think many people don't rate that highly, but I have a special place for it in my heart. 2011 was the year that King of Limbs came out, and I agree that it's not my favourite Radiohead album, but it's still a great album. It's a Radiohead album. So it's here on the list, and the track I'm going to go with is Codex. I can appreciate people's disappointment with this album, because this was the first Radiohead album which I was able to anticipate. I got into Radiohead around the time of In Rainbows, and I then had to wait until 2011 for a new Radiohead album. So I remember on the morning that the lead single of this album came out, which was Lotus Flower, waking up, putting that song on, and actually being a bit disappointed, because if you're expecting a follow-up to In Rainbows, King of Limbs will not provide that. But if you just appreciate King of Limbs for what it is a great album. 2012, and we have Thing of Gold by Snarky Puppy. When I was at uni, Snarky Puppy were like the cool band that all of the musos were into. Like if you're a music nerd, if you're one of the better musicians at uni, you like Snarky Puppy. They were basically the band that everyone wished they were part of. And I do think Snarky Puppy did a lot for innovating the visual element of music on the internet. They didn't pioneer it, but they basically had this concept of they record an album, but they record it live in front of an audience and put the whole thing on YouTube. And it means that you can see in real time how this intricate and beautiful music is coming together. And considering the quality and technicality of some of the performances on this album, it's amazing that they were able to get these in these like one continuous takes in front of an audience. These musicians are, next level. Now, Thing of Gold is not Snarky Puppy's flashiest song, but it's one of their more melodic and song-like songs. And particularly for an instrumental, for it to be so melodic and captivating, I think is really impressive. 2013 is one of those years where a lot of good music came out for me, but nothing that really shines through for me. One song that I do really like, but I don't actually listen to an awful lot, that came out 2013, that will be my pick, is Retrograde by James Blake. Retrograde has an amazing sound to it, largely accomplished by these beautiful kind of swelling Prophet synthesizers. It's one of the reasons I bought a Prophet synthesizer. I love the sound of Prophets, but as much as I love this song and its amazing sound world and its unusual harmony, I don't particularly listen to it that much. But it is a great piece of music, and if you haven't heard of James Blake, then do check him out. 2014, and we have Lana Del Rey with West Coast. When this song came out, I was familiar with Lana Del Rey. Her first album was pretty unavoidable, the one that had video games on it and Summertime Sadness. And I enjoyed her first album, but it was her second album where I actually really started to appreciate her music. There's a lot of great songs on that second album, Ultraviolence, but West Coast cuts above them all. I remember hearing it on the radio driving to a gig, and me and my friend were kind of just blown away by this song. It's really unusual for a pop song. Got a great mood, great instrumentation, and quite unusually a tempo shift between verse and chorus, which is something that you just don't see very often, and it's done to great effect in this song. So there's been a few years in this list where I've said like nothing particularly great came out, like for example 2013, but there's also some years where a lot of great stuff came out and it made it really hard to pick what I wanted. And one of those years for me is 2015. Loads of great music came out this year. I wanted to talk about Courtney Barnett. I wanted to talk about Doors and their album All Your Favourite Bands. And that's Doors spelled D-A-W-E-S, not The Doors. But the album I went with from 2015 is one of my real favourites. It's Currents by Tame Impala, and the song is The Less I Know The Better. This is one of those albums where all of the songs are great and they all have a sort of consistent sound, making for a great all album listening experience. Like you can listen to this album from beginning to end. But I think everyone is on the same page when they say that, when I say that Less I Know The Better is Tame Impala's crowning achievement. It's a pop song that people can appreciate on a very kind of just superficial level, but it's also got some amazingly crisp and just sort of ear candy covered production. For 2016, I was going to put in the song Your Best American Girl by Mixie, which is a bloody brilliant song, but alas, 2016 was a Radiohead year, and this year came out A Moonshaped Pool, from which Radiohead included one of my favourite Radiohead songs of all time, Daydreaming. Daydreaming is one of those songs that you can just sort of soak into. It's beautifully warm and emotional, that polyrhythm at the heart of it, the piano, the cellos. It's just a beautiful piece of music. Very much one of my favourite pieces of music of all time. Incredibly reflective piece of music. 2017, I considered the album Pure Comedy by Father John Misty. Father John Misty, one of my favourite songwriters, one of my favourite artists. You will hear from him later on this list. But I didn't go with Pure Comedy because this same year came out another album, and on that album is one of my favourite songs of all time, Motion Sickness by Phoebe Bridgers.
I have emotional motion sickness. Somebody wrote.
It wasn't until 2019, 2020 that I discovered Phoebe Bridgers, so a couple years after this song came out. But she has quickly risen to be one of my favourite artists of all time. I would genuinely say that if the Beatles are my favourite artist and Radiohead are my second favourite artist, Phoebe Bridgers is my third favourite artist. And Motion Sickness, of all of her songs, is my favourite. This song is gorgeous. The lyrics, the mood, the guitar that just sounds like a warm hug. It's a beautifully evocative piece of music. 2018, and I told you we'd be hearing from him. We now have Father John Misty. This song comes from the follow-up to his Pure Comedy album. This album's called God's Favourite Customer, and the song is Hang Out at the Gallows.
What's your politics? What's your religion?
If you're a fan of 70s music, which I am, Father John Misty will definitely be for you. Although stylistically he very much sounds like he could have come from the 70s, lyrically he's very modern. He's got great personality to his music. He's got some really interesting lyrical themes. Check him out. 2019, and we probably now have the most obscure song, I guess. But this is a song I really love. It is by a band called Penelope Isles, and the song is Leipzig. This is the only band on the list that I know personally, like I know in person. I was introduced to them both personally and musically by a friend of mine, but they're not on this list because I know them, and I don't just like them because I know them. I think this is a great song, and genuinely coming up against other songs written in 2019, released in 2019, this is my favourite song of the year. 2020, and this is the year where I discovered Phoebe Bridgers, and I discovered her through her album Punisher, which I think is one of the greatest albums of the 21st century. Every song on that album I adore. It's very hard to pick one, but I'm going to go with I Know the End.
Windows down, heater on, big bolt of light.
Punisher is when Phoebe really came into her own. I think on her first album, Stranger in the Alps, she has some amazing songs, but it's in Punisher where you can really hear her voice and her sound sort of come together. And I really just recommend listening to this entire album. It's got so many great songs on it, and I am so excited to hear her next album, which hopefully will come out in 2025. Let's wait and see. All right, we've got 4 songs left. We have 2021, and for 2021 we have the band Pom Poko, which is one of the more obscure bands on this list. Pom Poko are from Norway. I would describe them as almost like a prog indie band, because on the face of it they're kind of an indie band, but they've got some really interesting musical features going on, and the song we're going to go with is Danger Baby. Danger Baby comes from Pom Poko's album Cheetah. Cheetah has loads of great songs in it. It's really feel good, it's really light, but it's also musically very inventive. Not just from a sort of music theory point of view, when you've got lots of like weird time signatures, but from instrumentation, like the use of a Digitech whammy pedal to get some really interesting effects, some just generally really original approaches to the style. 2022, we have one of my favourite songwriters who's working right now, Christian Lee Hutson, and his song Strawberry Lemonade.
In a dream, drinking strawberry lemonade, feeding quarters to a pinball game.
Now, really, my favourite Christian Lee Hutson music comes from 2020 on his album Beginners, but I couldn't talk about it on the 2020 entry because I had to talk about Phoebe Bridgers on 2020. But in fact, there's a connection here because Phoebe Bridgers co-produced both that album and this Christian Lee Hutson album. Phoebe Bridgers works very closely with Christian Lee Hutson. So if you're a fan of Phoebe Bridgers, you should definitely check out Christian Lee Hutson. 2023, the last complete year in this list. And my favourite song for this year is Slugs by Slow Pulp.
You're a summer hit, I'm singing.
Slow Pulp are a indie rock band from America. I was lucky enough to see them recently in Brighton, and they sounded really, really good. Slugs is one of various songs that I love of theirs. It comes from their most recent album, Yard, and I just think it has such a great sound to it. Really sort of laid back, but also energizing at the same time. And our final entry on this list, our entry for 2024. Of course, the year isn't over yet, so there might still be something that comes out later this year that I fall in love with. But so far for this year, the thing that I really am enjoying listening to is the Lemon Twigs, which is a band that very much sounds like they could have come out of the 60s or 70s. They're kind of wearing that influence on their sleeve, but bringing it into the modern day. And the particular song I want to mention here is My Golden Years. So that's my list of my favourite songs from each year. Of course, some of these songs, well, most of them, particularly as most of them came out before I was born, I didn't discover in the year that they were released. I discovered them after the fact. Even songs that came out in the last few years, I didn't necessarily find until a few years later. So I might, a few years down the line from now, discover some new songs that will outrank the entries on this list. But do let me know in the comments down below what your favourite song is from each year if you have time, but if not, just some of your favourite picks. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks very much.